Welcome back to my channel. Today's topic is something that we tiptoe around a little bit, especially because there's a lot of loaded language in there. I want to talk a little bit about why your workplace is toxic and how to fix it. So before I dive in, we've created a brand new resource to go along with our leadership archetype quiz. Both links can be found below, but our brand new resource, our HR self-assessment checklist, is built for small business owners where you don't necessarily have HR on your side. You're not sure how to incorporate HR strategy and development into the organizational structure of your business. And maybe you're not even sure where the value is in HR. We wanted to make sure and split this up between a few different topics, but I would love it if you would download that self-assessment, run through the checklist. It'll take you about 5-10 minutes, and then send me back what score you got. If you're finding that you're missing a lot of things or you have never heard of a lot of things on there, you're not alone. And actually, you probably shouldn't score too high unless you're an HR person tuning into this channel, in which case, hello, friend. I wanted to really make sure that we kind of kick this off on a pretty direct foot. So let's get really real for a second. If your work feels more like a reality show where there's always something going on and there's always some conflict happening and you never know whose side is who's on and who's been talking about each other behind their back, or if something's going on behind the scenes. It could be something as simple as you feel like your gut is telling you something's off with the team and employees are quitting, even if it's not all within the same week. It may be something where they're quitting fairly close together. And there may be a link there to the way that they're communicating about the culture in your company. Sometimes we might end up having to admit, or maybe thinking, am I the problem? Why does everything feel so weird? And I'm here to say that even if you're running a really amazing business that generally has a great culture, there are so many things at play when it comes to a workplace environment in a small team, and so many different people, opinions, life circumstances, moods that can affect your culture, especially in a small business, because even one person can change the trajectory of how it feels to be at work at your company. First, I just want to jump in and say there are some signs to let you know if your workplace has some toxicity. If you didn't already know me, my name's Kira. I run a small HR consultancy called Paradigm People Operations Consulting. We are a team of highly trained and educated people managers, but we also specialize in compliance for small businesses, because whether you have one employee or 500, 95% of the laws and regulations that you have to follow are the same. We just don't always have those same resources as small businesses. So Paradigm has come in to bridge that gap. So first, let's talk about what toxic even means, because unless you're inhaling fumes at your desk, which I guess then that would be something that we need to talk to OSHA about, then it's probably more something along the lines of relational toxicity, which really eats away at trust, morale, and employee retention. Let's talk about some of those red flags. It doesn't mean that it's not something that you can change. It isn't something to take personally as a leader. It sometimes just means that the point that you're at in your business or in your team might need a little bit of extra attention. So first and foremost, and this is probably something that I see all the time in small businesses, especially if you're rapidly growing, and that's communication chaos. If people don't know what's expected of them, or there are updates buried in Slack threads with no accountability, or everything feels like it's last minute, then those all can be traits that can contribute to what our employees would deem a toxic workplace culture. Do I believe that every single business has some areas where they can improve? Absolutely. So if you're feeling like you have communication chaos, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have a toxic culture, but it could be something, if that sounds familiar, that you might want to address sooner rather than later. And all of the red flags we're going to talk about today are going to be similar things. Second, let's talk a little bit about leadership inconsistency. If your managers are approaching topics in different and varying ways. One manager is really direct and focused on the project management system and deadlines, but the other manager is a little bit more loosey-goosey and lets their department get away with things, or even is just really highly organized. And so there's a lot of room for flexibility, which may come off as two different cultures competing against each other. That can cue a lot of confusion. It can cue a lot of resentment, especially if there's cross-departmental or cross-functional communication, which, let's face it, in small business, our marketing department is basically the same thing as our operations department at times, and our operations is the same as our HR. We're not necessarily equipped to deal with that. That is all something to make sure that we're taking really seriously. The obvious one is high turnover and ghosting. If your employees are turning over really quickly and it's not your choice, if there's confusion about who's actually on the team at your weekly team meeting, if you aren't able to get a hold of your employees during work hours, then it could mean that there is a lack of consistency in the way that you are enforcing policies and expectations. So, of course, we want to make sure that people are taking accountability for how they behave. But, and I'm just going to say this one time, sometimes we need to turn that mirror in on ourselves and figure out what we could have done better to ensure that those expectations were met. Another red flag is gossip and side channels. If people feel unsafe speaking up directly, they'll whisper instead. That's not collaboration at all. And I think that's one of the things that HR can be a really helpful service to your company, to provide a neutral third-party resource so that they are directed to go where it is needed and your whole company can back that up. Having there be a third-party resource for you can prevent toxic workplace activities like gossip and side channels. But let's talk about the last red flag, which is that if no one at your company trusts HR or trusts the leaders that are doing the HR, if you are HR and you don't necessarily know how to deal with all of these issues that are coming through, or you're the leader of the company and you're HR at the same time, it can feel really personal when people come to you with issues that they're seeing in their jobs. So I'm here to encourage you that, especially after you start to get that second employee into place and you're starting to see those big growth goals come into your view, make sure that you have a third-party resource for your team to go to. I can't tell you how many times, and I can't tell you literally because it's confidential, that we have had employees from our clients reach out privately for some extra context or some understanding about policies, their job description, communication, whatever. And not only have we've been able to build that trust with the employees, but we've been able to mitigate any risk that the company might have while bringing really productive points to the CEO that don't necessarily feel as personal. For that reason, I think, especially me as the founder of an HR company, it would be amazing if my team had a third-party resource to go to that could filter some of the things that might hurt my feelings out and just bring me the brass tacks, so to speak, about what I need to change within my team to stop this toxic culture from continuing to spread. I know that there are lots of times in our business where a couple of these red flags might be happening, and I want to say that being a leader is an evolution. It's not something that you're ever done with. Like I said earlier, turning that mirror back on yourself and figuring out what you can do to set your team up for the best possible success. That is all to say, HR exists because people are unpredictable, which means that that's why we're always going to have a job. So you could do everything right, but you still may end up having to deal with toxic employees, and we want to know how to make sure and fix those things. Some of the reasons why this happens are going to be that there's no shared leadership language. If your managers are all doing their own thing and there's no common philosophy or culture that has been defined, then they're building silos where it's going to be more and more difficult for communication to happen effectively without having to require upper level intervention. When you are building out your team, you have to make sure that at the same time that you're putting energy into what they're going to be doing, you want to make sure you're putting energy into that cultural shared leadership language so that your team knows what to expect when they show up to work every day, regardless of who they're leaning on for direction. It's so key in small business. I can't even tell you. Second, I do want to just point out that in small business, we have to wear lots of different hats, and there's all types of strategic things we can do from an HR perspective to try to reduce any overwhelm. But we do want to make sure that there is really solid and clear roles. And that is coming from a place where I have to do this all the time too. I'm reevaluating the roles in my company because I come from a people first perspective. And that means that sometimes people are really going to be able to grasp on to a certain skill or something like that. And their job description, they're going to grow right out of it and start building something on top of it that I don't even have any real documentation of. So it is important in an evolutionary culture where people have the freedom to grow that you're revisiting those role structures. Finally, we have a couple of things here that I think come up fairly often, which is that your onboarding isn't really set up. So legally, your employees have different expectations because the onboarding was different for each of them. This can actually cause a legal issue and something that could cultivate some discriminatory behaviors, or you can be liable for discriminatory behaviors if everybody wasn't held to the same standard out the gate. We want to make sure that we're also noticing that if there is a lack of psychological safety, which that's a whole other topic that we'll be able to talk about later, but just keeping in mind that there has to be safety for your employees, especially because in a remote environment, we can't always lean on the physical aspects of the relationship and the job to build in that safety. So we have to make sure we're really intentional about it when we do have FaceTime with our people. And then finally, and this one is really calling me out, is burned out leaders. So I know that there are so many opportunities for us to grab on to the freedom that comes with owning our own business. So I just want to acknowledge that this is not something that we're ever going to be able to fully fix, but it is something that we can all work towards together. And that is exactly why we have our set to scale communities and our services that are built for small businesses so that you can figure out how to make sure that you're modeling a healthy culture so that you're not accidentally acting and creating a toxic culture. All of that is to say, how do we fix it? And there's 5 steps. 1, audit your culture and look at what is actually happening, not what you hope is happening. Step 2, establish your leadership language. We teach this through our People on Purpose method and our leadership course, but also a great thing to do is to kind of take that brand guide that you use for marketing and turn it inward and create a culture guide where you can share that leadership language. Step 3, set boundaries and expectations. Whatever boundaries that you expect to have your team follow for you, you should follow for them as well. And let them know if that's something that you might need to audit over time. For example, you might start out your business where your primary communication is weekly meetings and email, but then eventually you adopt Slack, or even things start to trickle into texts, and that's not something that you want your company to do. So don't be afraid to recalibrate based on expectations and boundaries that you have for your business. Step 4, stop tolerating gossip. It's okay to give people direct feedback. It's okay to encourage one-on-one meetings, but if something is said that's shady, if someone is saying something under the table, if they're saying something untoward towards another team member, do not tolerate it. Step 5, invest in your managers. Your managers are going to have 5x the impact on the culture that an individual contributor will. So make sure that they have what they need, their expectations are clear, and if you have an evolving culture with different job descriptions where sometimes things get watered down, make sure that you're creating a culture where that's accepted and it's okay if we have to ask additional questions about our expectations. If you have a really fluid culture like that, if you have a really fluid business that's growing really quickly, put those meetings on the calendar to make sure that you're recalibrating so people understand their marching orders. Let's be honest, most founders aren't trying to create toxic workplaces, but ignoring the signs won't make this go away. So if this hit close to home, that's a good thing. It means that you care. And if it's time to start fixing it, then we can definitely help you. Start out by downloading our HR self-assessment because compliance is a really critical component to building trust with your team and reducing any types of legal issues or time spent in court or things like that, because those unclear expectations are going to cause legal issues that are going to erode your culture from the outside in. And finally, don't hesitate to take our leadership archetypes quiz, because that quiz is going to put you right into the category where you're going to be able to really find what your leadership voice is, including an action plan in the form of a simple PDF that you can star on your desktop and refer back to when you're having difficult times. Thanks so much for watching the video. I'll see you next time. And if you liked this, make sure that you leave some comments below and make sure that you subscribe to the channel. Once again, my name's Kira, and you can also find me on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Threads, my favorite place to hang out. Hope you have a great rest of your week.